Plant lore, legends, and lyrics. Embracing the myths, traditions, superstitions, and folklore of the plant kingdom. By Richard Folkard. 1884. Chapter 3. Sacred Trees and Plants of the Ancients. All the nations of antiquity entertained for certain trees and plants a special reverence, which in many cases degenerated into a superstitious worship. The myths of all countries contain allusions to sacred or supernatural plants. The Veda mentions the heavenly tree which the lightning strikes down. The mythology of the Finns speaks of the celestial oak which the sun dwarf uproots. Yama, the Vedic god of death, sits drinking with companies of the blessed, under a leafy tree, just as in the northern saga Hel's place is at the foot of the ash Yggdrasil. In the eyes of the ancient Persians the tree, by its changes in spring, summer, autumn, and winter, appeared as the emblem of human existence, whilst at the same time, by the continuity of its life, it was reverently regarded as a symbol of immortality. Hence it came to pass that in Persia trees of unusual qualities were in course of time looked upon as being the abode of holy and even celestial spirits. Such trees became sacred, and were addressed in prayer by the reverential Parsis, though they eschewed the worship of idols, and honored the sun and moon simply as symbols. Ormuzd, the good spirit, is set forth as giving this command: Go, O Zoroaster, to the living trees, and let thy mouth speak before them these words: I pray to the pure trees. The creatures of Ormuzd. Of all trees, however, the cypress, with its pyramidal top pointing to the sky, was to the Parsis the most venerated, hence they planted it before their temples and palaces as symbolic of the celestial fire. The oak, the strongest of all trees, has been revered as the emblem of the Supreme Being by almost all the nations of heathendom, by the Jewish patriarchs, and by the children of Israel, who eventually came to esteem the tree sacred, and offered sacrifices beneath its boughs. Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, Teutons, and Celts, all considered the oak as sacred, and the Druids taught the people of Britain to regard this tree with peculiar reverence and respect. It is frequently mentioned by the Roman poets as the tree of Jove, to whom it was dedicated, and near to Chaonia, a mountainous part of Epirus, was a forest of oaks, called the Chaonian or Dodonian forest, where oracles were given, as some say, by the trees themselves. The world tree of Ramo, the old center of the Prussians, was an oak, and it was reverenced as a tree of great sanctity. The Indians adored the tree Asoka, consecrated to Vishnu, and the banyan, in the belief that Vishnu was born amongst its branches. The Somalata, Sarcastema aphylla, or sacred plant yielding the immortal fluid offered to the gods on the altars of the Brahmins, is regarded with extreme reverence. The name Amrita, or immortal tree, is given to the euphorbia, Panicum dactylon, Cocculus cordifolius, Pinus deodara, Emblica officinalis, Terminalia citrina, Piper lawn gum, and many others. The holy basil, Ocimum sanctum, is looked upon as a sacred plant. The deodar is the Devadaru or tree god of the Shastras, alluded to in Vedic hymns as the symbol of majesty and power. To Indra, the supreme god of the Vedic Olympus, are dedicated the Terminalia Arjuna, the tree of Indra, the Methonica superba, the flower of Indra, a species of pumpkin called Indra verunica, appertaining to Indra and Varuna, the Vitex nigundo, the drink of Indra, the Abris precatorius, and hemp, the food of Indra. To Brahma are sacred the Butea frondosa, the Ficus glomerata, the mulberry, the seed of Brahma, the Clerodendron siphonanthus, the Hemionitis cordifolia, leaf of Brahma, the Saccharum munga, with which is formed the sacred girdle of the Brahmins, and the Poa sinusoides, or kusa grass, a species of vervain, employed in Hindu sacrificial rites, and held in such sanctity as to be acknowledged as a god. The peepal or bo tree, Ficus religiosa, is held sacred by Buddhists as the holy tree and the tree of knowledge. The Burmese Buddhists surround their pagodas and religious houses with trees, for which they entertain a high regard. The first holy men dwelt under the shade of forest trees, and from that circumstance, in the Burmese cultus, every Buddha is specially connected with some tree, as Shin Gautama with the banyan, under which he attained his full dignity, and the Sharia robusta, under which he was born and died, and, as we are told, the last Buddha of this world cycle, Marimadihya, will receive his Buddhaship under the Mezhua Faria. The Burman also regards the eugenia as a plant of peculiar sanctity, a protective from all harm. The jamboa, or rose apple, is held in much reverence in Tibet, where it is looked upon as the representative of the mystical Amrita, the tree which in paradise produces the Amrita or ambrosia of the gods. The cedar has always been regarded by the Jews as a sacred tree, and to this day the Maronites, Greeks, and Armenians go up to the cedars of Lebanon, at the Feast of the Transfiguration, and celebrate Mass at their feet. To the ancient inhabitants of northern Europe the elm and the ash were objects of a special veneration. Many sacred trees or pillars, formed of the living trunks of trees, have been found in Germany, called Irminsul, one of which was destroyed by Charlemagne in 772, in Westphalia. The mountain ash, or rowan tree, was, in olden times, an object of great veneration in Britain, and in Evelyn's day was reputed of such sanctity in Wales, that there was not a churchyard that did not contain one. The colossal baobab, Adansonia, is worshipped as a divinity by the Negroes of Senegambia. The nipa or Susa palm, Nipa fruticans, is the sacred tree of Borneo. The gigantic dragon tree, Dracaena draco, of Orotava was for centuries the object of deep reverence to the Aborigines of the Canary Isles. The zamang of Gera, an enormous mimosa, has from time immemorial been held sacred in the province of Caracas. The moriche palm, Mauritia flexuosa, is considered a deity by the Tamancas, a tribe of Orinoco Indians, and is held sacred by the aboriginal Mexicans. The nalumbo, or sacred bean, Nelumbium speciosum, was the lotus adored by the ancient Egyptians, who also paid divine honors to the onion, garlic, acacia, laurel, peach tree, lentils of various sorts, and the heliotrope. Wormwood was dedicated to Isis. And Antirrhinum, supposed to be the ancient cynocephalia, or dog's head, to Osiris. The sacred lotus of the East, the flower of the old Hindu mythologies, wherein the lotus, attribute of Ganga, embleming the world's great reproductive power, was held in veneration, was the Nelumbium speciosum. This mystic flower is a native of northern Africa, India, China, Japan, Persia, and Asiatic Russia, and in all these countries has, for centuries, maintained its sacred character. It is the linhua of the Chinese. And, according to their theology, enters into the beverage of immortality. Henna, Lawsonia alba, the flower of paradise, is dedicated to Muhammad, who characterized it as the chief of the flowers of this world and the next. The pomegranate tree was highly reverenced both by the Persians and the Jews. The fruit was embroidered on the hem of Aaron's sacred robe, and adorned the robes of Persia's ancient priest-kings. Pine cones were regarded by the Assyrians as sacred symbols, and as such were used in the decoration of their temples. In Teutonic and Scandinavian mythology the rose is sacred to Hulda, the flax to Bertha, the spignel to Balder, and the hair moss, Polytricum commune, is dedicated to Thor's wife, Sif. Of the divinities after whom the days of the week were named, the sun has his special flower, the moon her daisy, Tyr, Tuesday, the Tys viola or March violet, and the Meizerian, Woden, Wednesday, the Geranium sylvaticum, Odin's favor, and the monkshood, Odin's helm. Thor, Thursday, the monkshood, Thor's hat, and the burdock, Thor's mantle, Frigg, Friday, and Freya, who is often confounded with her, had many plants dedicated to them, which have since been transferred to Venus and the Virgin Mary, and are not now recognized by the name of either of the Scandinavian goddesses. In the north of Europe, however, the Supercilium veneris is still known as Freya's hair, and the perfumed Orchis gymnadenia conopsia as Frigg's grass. Saturn or Setir, Saturday. The supposed name of an Anglo-Saxon god, is probably but a mere adaptation of the Roman Saturnus. It may, perhaps, be apposite to quote, for what it may be worth, Verstegen's statement that the Saxons represented cedar as carrying a pail of water in which were flowers and fruits, whereby was declared that with kindly rain he would nourish the earth to bring forth such fruits and flowers. In the Grecian and Roman mythology we find numerous trees and flowers dedicated to the principal divinities. Thus, the alder was dedicated to Neptune. Apple was dedicated to Venus. Ash was dedicated to Mars. Bay was dedicated to Apollo. Beech was dedicated to Jupiter Ammon. Cornell cherry was dedicated to Apollo. Cypress was dedicated to Pluto. Dittany was dedicated to Juno, Diana, and Luna. Dog grass was dedicated to Mars. Fir was dedicated to Cybele and Neptune. Heliotrope was dedicated to Phoebus Apollo. Horsetail was dedicated to Saturn. Iris was dedicated to Juno. Ivy was dedicated to Bacchus. Laurel was dedicated to Apollo. Lily was dedicated to Juno. Maidenhair was dedicated to Pluto and Proserpine. Myrtle was dedicated to Venus and Mars. Narcissus was dedicated to Ceres, Pluto, and Proserpine. Oak was dedicated to Jupiter. Olive was dedicated to Minerva. Palm was dedicated to Mercury. Pine was dedicated to Neptune and Pan. Pink was dedicated to Jupiter. Pomegranate was dedicated to Juno. Poplar was dedicated to Hercules. Poppy was dedicated to Ceres, Diana, and Somnus. Rhamnus was dedicated to Janus. Rocket was dedicated to Priapus. Rose was dedicated to Venus. Vine was dedicated to Bacchus. Willow was dedicated to Ceres. To the Furies was consecrated the juniper, the Fates wore wreaths of the narcissus, and the Muses bay leaves. The Grecian centaurs, half men, half horses, like their Indian brethren the Gandharvs, understood the properties of herbs and cultivated them, but, as a rule, they never willingly divulged to mankind their knowledge of the secrets of the vegetable world. Nevertheless, the centaur Chiron instructed Aesculapius, Achilles, Aeneas, and other heroes in the polite arts. Chiron had a panacea of his own, which is named after him Chironia Centaurium, or Gentiana Centaurium, and, as a vulnerary, the Ampylos Chironia of Pliny, or Tamus Communis. In India, on account of the shape of its leaves, the Ricinus communis is called Gandharvahasta, having the hands of a Gandharv. Thus concludes Chapter 3 of Plant Lore, Legends, and Lyrics. Coming up next in the series is Chapter 4, Floral Ceremonies, Wreaths, and Garlands.